Hey there. Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about dealing with difficulties. And I want to start with a quote from one of the most influential books in my life, The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. In fact, it's the very first line in this book, and it's in the chapter on discipline. Life is difficult. This is a great truth, one of the greatest truths. It is a great truth because once we truly see this truth, we transcend it. Once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because once it is accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. One of my clients has been struggling with a deep depression for the last year. She reports that a couple times a week, the pain was so acute inside her head and the voices so loud, she seriously contemplated jumping out the window of her 6th floor apartment. More than once I was concerned that she might do that. The cocktail of psych meds that she had been on had stopped working, and things got really dark. There were difficulties in the healthcare system and finding a psychiatrist to prescribe new meds for her, problems with getting the meds paid for, and she started to go outside Western medicine. She did a couple rounds of ketamine. She did a psilocybin journey, which seemed to be actually probably the most helpful of all the things she did, and followed that with microdosing under the care of a psychedelic medicine doula. And as with almost everything in life, there are times when things are helpful and there are times when they are not. And the same goes for psychedelics, which I have a wide and varied opinion about, but I'll save that for another podcast. In this case, they were extremely helpful. The ketamine, not so much, and she even did a little round of LSD. That was way too much for her. But the microdosing mushrooms has seemed to be the trick. But the depression, from my perspective, is the symptom, not the problem. In our culture, we often consider comfort to be the goal and see pain or suffering as the problem, rather than looking deeper at the cause or source of the pain or suffering as the real problem that wants to be solved. And it's quite dangerous to just shoot for comfort in the short run, with the goal of just medicating or eradicating our pain, because that pain holds tremendous information. And when we just focus on the pain as the problem, then the idea might be that we should just medicate the pain. And this is very unwise because we're often missing the opportunities for more permanent growth and change if we look deeper at the root of what's causing the suffering, looking at what the real problem is. And from my perspective, both depression and anxiety are symptoms of deeper systemic problems. Now, often we need to stabilize the presenting problem so we can look deeper. But if we don't do that deeper work, then the underlying problem is going to keep coming back. And I'm happy to report that after a lot of very diligent work on her part, whether this cycle of depression faded on its own or she found the right combination of exercise, life change, and microdosing, she's doing really well and ready to look at some of these deeper problems. She's worried about money. She hates her job. She lives alone, very isolated, hasn't had a romantic relationship in decades, but she's resistant to connecting with people. She's actually a very talented artist, but she's collected so much art materials that she's overrun with clutter. And her apartment is so packed with stuff, she doesn't want to invite anybody over. And on the other hand, it's completely overwhelming for her to think about letting any of the stuff go. And that's when we looked deeper why she wanted to just jump out the window and run away from all the problems. One of the real benefits of pain is that it makes us open-minded and willing to try things and make changes that we would not be open to doing if we were comfortable. And so now that she has found a manageable baseline, she's ready to do some of that deeper work. And when we met this week, she said, I'm asking these big questions. And the two big questions are, who am I and why am I here? And she said, am I my depression? No, that's a thing that seems to happen internally for me. Am I an artist or a secretary? No, those are things I do for work or fun. Am I my clutter in my apartment? No, those are just things that I've collected. And who am I without all those things? And why am I here? Am I here to make my boss happy? To have a nice apartment? To make art that I might sell on Etsy? And I told her she's asking the right questions, the big questions. And I think these questions directly interface with this idea that life is difficult and how we orient toward our problems. And so I think these are really great questions. And asking the right questions is important because the questions we ask determine the answers we get. And a lot of my work in spiritual psychology is asking people good questions, deepening questions, helping them clarify the important questions that they want answers to in their life. And they're answers most of us want in our shared humanity. And most of us, particularly if you're listening to this podcast, I'll assume, have a sense that there's something more going on here. Underneath physical reality is a deeper metaphysical reality, and we experience that through serendipity, through deep connections with others, through our passions in life, and through the mysteries of birth and suffering, joy and death. The idea that life is more than a series of problems to be solved or difficulties to be overcome, although that does seem like part of it. Although the difficulties we have, the problems that we face, that we are called to live through and solve, or allow them to change us. From my perspective, they're kind of like the roadmap of our individual soul path. And the same issues will often return to us again and again in slightly different form. This isn't the first time my client has been suicidally depressed. And if there's one general question that I find helpful in almost every difficult situation, that question is, where am I being called to grow? And if we get back to this great truth that life is difficult and that that's not a design flaw, it can really shift our perspective on the challenges and difficulties we face in life, rather than feeling victimized by them, or that there's some pestilence visited upon us that is an injustice, and rather that they are circumstances or opportunities to perpetuate and guide our individual development and evolution on a soul level. And I personally have come to believe that, at least here in Middle Earth, this is a consciousness evolution machine that we're part of, and evolving and growing, elevating our consciousness is the path to joy and fulfillment. And there's this built-in continuum of joy and suffering that's kind of like a roadmap on a deeper level if we pay attention to it. Suffering is information that something needs attention or to change. Joy, peace, fulfillment, I believe, are affirmations that we're on the right path. And we all need to make micro adjustments all the time. And one of the kind of cultural pathologies that we almost all suffer from is this idea that there's a happy place where nothing else happens, and that's the goal. That our difficulties and problems are in the way of our happiness, and we need to get them permanently off the table, and then we'll be good forever and ever. But that's seeking some kind of state of permanence, which is impossible because life is always in motion and flow. Buddhism speaks directly to all of these issues. The first noble truth is life is suffering, and the cause of that suffering is attachment and aversion, our desires and our avoidance of the life circumstances that we have, and accepting, which is no small feat, the impermanence of all things, and resting in the ground of being. And because everything's in motion, I think we can glimpse that. We can expand that experience of being fully present and find connection, joy, love, fulfillment in the moment, and then the moment changes. And again, I don't think this is a design flaw. There's some greater wisdom here, aligning ourselves with that wisdom, submitting ourselves to the mystery of life and to being curious about our difficulties, maybe not taking ourselves so seriously. This little avatar that I get for this lifetime. Who am I really? This idea of Renee is kind of a conglomeration of a whole bunch of inner narratives based on past experience. But a lot of my work is about loosening up our attachment to those narratives, even shifting them completely as we update our relationship with ourself, with the world, with our understanding of the divine. And when we change the narratives about ourselves, the language in our head, the deep beliefs that we have, that we feel like are true, but they're just a perspective. And when we shift those perspectives, our ego identification shifts as well. But underneath it all, there is a deeper self. I like to call it the soul self. Some call it the I am. The beingness that each of us has that has followed us through our entire life. Many traditions will point that it will continue after we leave this body and that it existed before. And perhaps that I am is connected with this greater life force, that there is a permanence in the metaphysical that doesn't exist in the physical. And it's very easy to get identified with our problems. I know as an addict, my tolerance for suffering is not very high. Even to this day, I hit a couple really dark points in the last few months recovering from this knee replacement surgery. Combination of physical pain, feeling confused and disappointed by how the recovery process was going. I had never been debilitated like that before for that length of time. I'm still in it, and I can still go pretty dark pretty quick. Luckily, I have a lot of tools. Make phone calls, pray and meditate, get out in nature, connect with spiritual community. Started listening to sound meditations. It's been really, really helpful. Whole different modality for me. Connecting with healing, hopeful, elevated energy through beautiful sound. But when I have a particular pain point, consciously or unconsciously, I get obsessed with making the pain go away. And I used to distract myself with drugs and alcohol, compulsive eating, and get in loops of anxiety, obsessing about relationship issues and how the people around me should change has always been a favorite. And I have quite a few trusted advisors, therapists, healers, and helpers. It's very important for me to get external perspectives to answer this question. Where am I being called to grow? What's the solution to this difficulty or the relief of this suffering? I do believe that we are drawn forward in our evolution to heal, solve, and resolve these things, not to just medicate them, and that they call us into the deeper flow again of our own soul's journey. But we can't always read the roadmap by ourselves. I know I can't. And the difficulties, the suffering, ironically, often call us into a different kind of difficulty, which is usually about facing our fears and stepping into the more expanded, receptive, and open position of receiving what it is that we most deeply want, which is another really important question. What do I really want? Not what do I think is possible, not what's practical. What do I most deeply want? My secret dreams, my highest hopes. What is it that really brings me joy? And do I have the courage, the willingness to move toward those things? And if I don't know what they are, can I just let go of my habitual patterned loops of problems and suffering and open up to a different way of being? That's what happened when I stopped drinking. The drinking and drugs were medicating deeper underlying emotional and spiritual yearnings, medicating unresolved wounding, and my own often limited and immature perspective on things that was quite self-centered most of the time. And when I removed the medication and became willing really to grow and change, literally miraculous things happened and doors appeared where there used to be walls. And pathways presented themselves that I couldn't even imagine, beyond my wildest dreams. And over again, that has continued to unfold in my life. I'm on a wild adventure right now in Manhattan. And I honestly have no idea where I'm going to live when my lease is up next year. And that can make me fucking crazy, or it can feel like this exciting, adventurous opportunity. It all depends on what day it is, to tell you the truth. Brings me right to the edge of how much do I trust or distrust this universal flow. And back to those questions, what do I really want? Who am I really? And why am I here? And from the most meta perspective, I do believe that we are all tiny aspects of divinity that wants to have an experience of itself, and that my experience is God's experience, and that there's really no right or wrong because it's all just experience. But I have come to know that we do have choice in our experience. We have a lot more agency in creating our reality, and there's a lot more help available to us to help recreate that reality than most of us are aware of or can imagine. And as I have been introduced into all of these amazing tools and practices through shamanism, body-centered mindfulness, prayer and meditative practices, to be able to make these direct and really dynamic connections with the larger system, with the transpersonal realms that have only our highest good in mind. It's become my life passion to help you make those connections as well. And that's what my book and guided audio, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing, is about. It's what this podcast is about. And it's certainly what my individual sessions and mentorship program are about. And there is so much great work out there and so many gifted, talented, generous helpers. These connections are absolutely available to you as well, if you're willing to pursue them. And the universe is always listening. One of my favorite prayers is, show me my highest good. Grant me the power to carry it out. And I like to add, make it simple and make it obvious. And a lot of times the universe does. So back to this idea that in order to solve our difficulties, we often have to face a different level of difficulty, which is our own fear and limitation. Most of us play way too small, expect way too little, and are actually attached to the familiarity of our particular loops of suffering, because stepping out into the unknown, even if it brings us the joy and fulfillment we seek, can be really challenging. And so underneath my client's depression and her hoarding house filled with unused art materials is a call to step into the artist that she really is, and to open to breathing in and breathing out, to receiving and releasing, to being nourished and creating in a way that's way outside her comfort zone. And depression, in my experience, is almost always a pressing down of the authentic or the soul self, and allowing the life energy of that soul substance to express itself. It'll generally rock your world. And that's why a lot of us stay in the familiarity of our suffering rather than asking that question, where am I being called to grow? And the good news about growth is that what was uncomfortable then becomes manageable and comfortable. A little tiny apple tree, a sapling, cannot hold much fruit. The trunk and the branches are too weak to be able to support the fruit. And so we need to grow our trunk and our branches. We need to throw deep roots so that we can develop the strength to be able to bear the fruit that each of us is here to bring. Plant the seeds for the next generations. Who am I really, and why am I here? Those are complicated questions. I don't think they have singular answers. And perhaps the primary question of, what do I really want in this life? What brings me joy may point to those answers. And so as my client eased her way out of this darkness, she left the isolated job as a personal assistant for this wealthy man that she'd been at miserably for years, and she was offered an art residency for the next 3 months. And she was in a little shop recently, spoke with the woman, showed her some of her work, and the woman bought 7 pieces. And so the next level of challenge for this particular person is to grow in the skills, abilities, and willingness to produce her art and actually market it in the world. and that will bring its own set of circumstances and challenges. And so shifting in perspective from the idea that I have problems that need to be solved so that then I'll be okay, into this wisdom perspective that there are always circumstances unfolding that challenge us, and aligning ourselves to meet them with willingness, creativity, even curiosity and playfulness is a completely different experience. Where am I being called to grow? That my life circumstances hold the keys to my own growth and evolution, and that underlying it all is a benevolent I am that I am a part of. Thank you so much for listening. Deep gratitude to my supporters on Patreon and through this podcast. I have 3 digital courses now available if you'd like to do some spiritual psychology work on your own time. I have the Become Your Own Shaman series, connecting with the deep, transformative, and mystical mysteries of spirits of nature and the celestial realms. And I have a really potent 10-session course on healing trauma. I have over 2,000 students of this course on Insight Timer. It's a really gentle but profound path to heal your own trauma. Access to all that content is available on my website, reneemckenna.com. And I'll leave a link to those courses in the show notes. If you're interested to see if a block of spiritual psychology work might benefit you in your life, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.